serious? What is your scariest true story? Saw a guy get his throat cut. I was quite young and there were a bunch of middle school kids fighting, then one pulled out a knife and slit the other's throat. Blood was gushing out and that scene was kinda branded in my mind. When I was 15-16, my mom put me on diet pills. Still don't know what they are. That let me get away with just eating a tiny cup of soup the whole day and be okay with sleeping less than 3 daily. I got hooked on them because I could study way more. I guess the sleep deprivation finally caught up one night, and I started having auditory hallucinations. It started with white noise, then morphed into what sounded like a garbled shouting argument between a bunch of people and started echoing until it became a man with a deep, sinister laugh laughing hysterically. The rational part of me figured it's auditory hallucinations, but holy crap, it was petrifying and I could feel every hair standing up. Then another part of me just thought, well, if it's not a hallucination and I'm actually going to get murdered by bloodthirsty ghosts, at least I don't have to take the test tomorrow. I continued studying. Asian schools were tough. Working with a serial killer who was arrested by a SWAT team moments after we were in the same lab together. He had a gun on him at the time. When I was 8 and my brother 6, my mom picked us up from school one day. When we got home, my mom had forgotten her keys, so she knocked on the door for my grandma to let us in. Now architecture is super important to the story. We lived in a very well-to-do apartment building on the 8th floor, where each floor was a long rectangle with a single apt on each end, so 2 apts per floor. In the middle of the rectangle of each floor, there was a single elevator. The building was essentially all glass. There were no external fire staircases or ladders, and the nearest structure was another building an entire block away. Okay, so we knock on the door. My grandma yells from the inside, "I'm coming." So we wait, and we wait. 1 minute, nothing. So we knock again. Again my grandma. I said, "I'm coming." 3 minutes, then 5. She still isn't opening the door even though we can clearly hear her in the kitchen inside the house, so we are getting pissed. We knock and she just keeps on saying the same thing. I said, "I'm coming right now." 10 minutes later, the elevator opens behind us and out comes my grandma. The apartment had been empty the entire time. It's been 20 years since then, and my mom, brother, and I all clearly remember talking to that voice that sounded exactly like my grandma. Zero explanation. My grandma is still alive, BTW. I'm 52. When I was about 8 years old, 5 other 8-10-year-olds were in a kid's bedroom playing. This one boy and me were wrestling around when someone turned off the lights. When the light went off, there was a loud pop. Another kid had found a pistol and fired it. I was laying on the bedroom floor. The bullet missed my head by 2 inches. It was a straight down shot that narrowly missed. Me and my fiance saw a guy on the side of the road asking for a ride. I told her there was no way in duck I'd pick up a male hitchhiker. She told me it was the right thing to do, but I convinced her that we shouldn't. 3 days later, he was arrested for murdering the couple that picked him up. I was abducted off the street while jogging, choked and threatened to kill me, and sexually assaulted me. I lived. He murdered the next female he snatched off the street from the same small town in California. He is on death row at San Quentin. When I was in high school, I was walking home alone in my school uniform, and this car stops in front of me as I am trying to cross the road. The guy driving it asks me if I was still a virgin. I tried to walk around the car and ignore him, but he keeps moving the car to stop me from crossing the street. I look around to ask for help, but the street was deserted. I have never been so scared on my life. I finally ended up walking back up the way I came as fast as I could, hoping to find a way hide or ask for help. This probably doesn't count, but my dad once dug up 2 World War II mortars in his backfield. Thankfully he didn't hit them and was fine. Scared the shit out of me that they're just like there, chilling underground until they blow you to duck. Reddit. Wow, 5k upvotes, alright, that's cool as hell. Also, images of said mortars. I was about 9, laying in bed watching snow fall out of a window that faced the backyard. Suddenly a man's face popped up just inches from my window, staring right at me. I still remember his beard coated in ice and his steamy breath. After a few seconds I unfroze and ran into my mom's room. She thought I was making it up and sent me back to my room. I hid so I couldn't see out of the window. The next morning when we left for school there were footprints in the fresh snow that straight went back to my window. I grew up in a farmhouse built in the 1860s. I was probably 14 or so and was home alone while my parents took my little brother to t-ball practice. My little brother did, and still does, call me sissy and I have always called him Bubby. I was sitting in the living room watching TV and heard the back door that we always use open and my little brother shout out sissy, and I responded back with hey Bubby. I waited a minute or two and heard nothing else, then yelled out again with no response. As it turns out, they hadn't gotten home yet. I was literally too scared to move and stayed put till they did get home about 30 minutes later. When I was 8 and alone in my room I felt like someone was there with me, watching. I was terrified so I said wanna play, and then one of my toys flew out of the shelf and landed right at my feet. Never called mom louder. My grandmother went into the hospital for a really bad case of the flu. She seemed to be doing better, but out of nowhere she got a brain bleed which happens extremely rarely with something as simple as the flu. In the end there was too much damage to the brain. Years ago I had this involved dream about a man in a warehouse and him getting shot at close range in the head. It was so freaky it woke me up. Turns out it was about 5:30 in the morning so I turned on the TV and the local news was reporting on a story just like it. I did not have the TV on while I was asleep. Weird. I was watching TV in my room one night when the power went off. Our house has old wiring, so this happens sometimes. No big deal. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down to the basement to flip the circuit breakers. As I was going back to my room, I heard a loud thud that came from my bedroom. I go in and turn the light on and look around. Everything was in its place except my statue of the Virgin Mary. It was on the floor across the room from the table I used to keep it on. It was made out of glass and its head was broken off. There's no way it could have gotten there on its own and no one else was home at the time. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts, but to this day, I still can't explain how it happened. Used to live in a house in a quiet neighborhood. I'd often stay up late in the living room, which had a fairly large glass door to the backyard that you could slide open with no curtain. Sometimes I'd hear noises in the backyard but it'd usually be my cats. Sometimes the motion sensing porch light would turn on, but again I figured it was some nighttime critter. One day after a night of snow I noticed a fresh set of shoe prints that stopped dead right in front of that glass door. Someone had obviously been there at some point in the night. Another time I noticed the glass door's lock was slightly tampered with. I'm actually freaking myself out writing all of this because at the time I figured it was just a one-time thing, but in reality this person could have been making repeat visits anytime he wanted before and after that snow day. When I was a little kid I had a reoccurring nightmare almost weekly. I would be in the basement and would hear a meow. I would search for the source in the dark and find at a sunken window at eye level with a little bit of filtered light. Lying in it would be a dead grey cat with empty eye sockets fixed on me, giving a mournful shriek. Sometimes a red light would open in the eye, and everyone I loved would die. I would wake up at various stages of this nightmare. It got so bad one summer that I slept with the lights on all night. Every time I heard a cat, I was afraid it was the eyeless grey one from the nightmare. Fast forward 25 years later, and I am buying my first home with my wife. It doesn't have central air, so we sleep downstairs in the basements for the summer. We have one of those sunken windows. One night the first week there we wake up to the sound of a cat meowing and furiously trying to get into the bedroom through the sunken window. In the filtered light I see a grey cat, and I see an empty eye socket staring back at me. We've slept upstairs since, but, in a twist, the cat is lovely. His name is Lou, and he runs beside me when I go for a jog. He also plays with our new Australian Shepherd puppy. Most social cat I've ever seen. When I was young, my parents and I went to see the fireworks show at the Vinoy Spelling Hotel in Florida. We were speaking to this really nice woman next to us. She was a foster mom for kids, adopted a lot of animals, super into charity. I was dancing with her and my mom called me over, saying the fireworks will start soon. And less than a second later the shot went off to start them. The woman grabbed her chest and said ouch. Something bit me, and when she pulled her hand away there was a perfect hole in her chest. She stood there a moment in shock before it started bleeding and then she fell to the ground. Everyone started panicking. I was separated from my parents and hid in the elevator. I kept going to random floors with people until I saw someone that my parents knew and stuck with them. The police came to our hotel room that night to get witness statements. We were on top of the hotel, and I never really looked into it after. I still can't do fireworks, but my dad told me it was a freak accident involving the gun they used to signal the fireworks. It was just the sight of her casually pulling her hand away, thinking it was a bee sting, and seeing this perfect hole, then just blood. It was so surreal. When I was 14, for exactly an entire month, which month I forget, I would woke up every morning at 3:30 am or 3:15 am with the feeling I was being watched. If I did manage to fall asleep I would be completely plagued with nightmares. One morning I woke up at 3:15 am like normal but immediately felt someone tap on the back of my head. Then as the month ended it was over. Needless to say I can't ever enjoy or want to fall asleep during 3 am to 4 am and I'm still quite paranoid of my room in general. Not sure if this fits the bill but former casino employee here. I worked security on the 7 PM to 3 AM shift one Saturday night after the nightclub closed down. A fight started between two PPL that quickly escalated to a all-out riot brawl. We were wrangling with tons of PPL on the floor. The police were even in the mix. We heard someone yell gun, gun, gun. The patrons that were fighting were grabbing at the cops' guns to pull them out. Needless to say it was chaos and definitely scary. The police were screaming in their radios for gang squad. Plainclothes bigfers. They showed up out of nowhere and laid the little smack down on the PPL fighting. The story doesn't do what actually happened justice, but man it was scary to be laying on the ground fighting with all hell breaking loose around you. I was living in an old railway workers' quarters in a small town in Western Australia. In these quarters each room is its own separate building. About 1:30 one morning I woke up to the feeling of hands around my throat and choking. A scary but a silly story. Almost every day, when coming home from school, as soon as I entered my home, the lights immediately turned on without me switching the lights on. It really freaked me out until one day I noticed that when I entered my home, the reason why the lights turned on by themselves was because when I turned around to lock the door, the school bag on my shoulders pushed the light switch on, and I didn't notice for weeks. Dumb 11-year-old me. A very large gang of men targeted me and a friend at a bar. They got between us to try and separate us and pushed into and leant over us to try and distract us from our drinks. They also tried to get us to drink drinks that they had bought. We left the bar thinking that was the end of it and went to a chip shop across the street. When we turned around the same men were all waiting outside for us. Adrenaline kicked in and we ran and they followed us. They followed for at least a mile and the only way home was through a secluded park in the dark, so we had to run through this park knowing we were being hunted and they could ambush us any minute. But for some reason we managed to escape and I still don't know why. I'll post one of my own too. When I was about 7 my family moved into a house where the previous renter had shot himself in the bathroom. No freaking clue why my parents told this to a 7-year-old. You could even see blood stains on the tiles. I would constantly have nightmare of a black man chasing me around the house trying to kill me. One night I had a dream that I was asleep on the living room floor. From where I was I could see all the entrances to the rooms in the house. I dreamed that he was going around into all the rooms looking for me. I knew that if I moved he would know where I was. The only thing was though, it felt real. I could feel everything around me. Finally I got brave enough to run to the bedroom. Of course he saw me and chased me there. I woke up in the bathroom that he killed himself in. Years later my dad showed me a picture of the previous renter. My dad was friends with them, but I had never met them, and it was the man from my dreams. I have a buttload more because I'm slightly sensitive to the paranormal. I'll post more later. I was snow skiing for the first time and heading down a slope way too fast. I started off on a green, but somehow wound up on a much more difficult run. There was a right degree turn at the bottom of the hill I had to navigate or I would fly off the mountain at 10,000 feet. Somehow I pulled it off and felt awesome, but looking back on it still scares it out of me. When I was 14, I was out camping in the Rocky Mountains with my grandparents. I was in my own tent, and they were in theirs. We had made sure to put all food into the car to be safe from bears, and made sure there were no crumbs or anything on us or in the tents. I woke up at what I think was 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning, the sound of heavy, padded footsteps and breathing. It was moving around the camp. So I sat up and looked through this little plastic window in the tent, and there was a huge bear outside. I got scared and lay back down trying not to move, and I heard the bear lumber over to my tent. I heard it sniffing and actually saw it poke my tent. After about 20 minutes of it sniffing around, it left, but it was pretty terrifying for my 14-year-old self. TLDR, I was camping as a kid and a bear started sniffing around the campsite and my tent. When I lived in Texas and I was in the 2nd grade, I was waiting outside of my elementary school for my mom to come pick me up. She was late as she often was, so I was one of the last kids there. This would have been the very early 90s, so people were a lot more lax. At some point the teacher went inside to go do something with another kid. A middle-aged woman in a blue minivan pulled up and rolled down her window and said that my mom had sent her to get me and bring me home. I thought it was weird that she didn't know me by name, so I went inside to go ask my teacher what I should do. By the time we got back outside, she was gone and my mom arrived a few minutes later. That lady was totally going to kidnap me, and I probably would have been smuggled across the Mexican border and sold or murdered or something. 8 years ago, my brother was very abusive towards me because our dad ran out right after I was born. One night, he was drunk, 17 at the time. I was 13, came home while my parents were out and started beating on me as usual. He normally would let up after a little bit, but this time he just wouldn't stop. Don't remember much afterwards. My parents came home to, as I was told, finding my unconscious and very bloodied face. I ended up having a pretty severe concussion that caused my stutter that I deal with to this day and a rather messed up nose. It also made me have to give up on playing football for a year because of the constant pain. Needless to say, I haven't had a real conversation with my brother, and I haven't talked at all to him since this happened. Edit. Wrong number of years since incident, and it doesn't feel like this happened that long of a time ago. When I was a kid I had a Furby. After a few weeks I got bored with it, and when the batteries ran out I never bothered to replace them. After that I just left it sat on my windowsill, until I was awoken one night. The Furby had turned itself on somehow, rocking backwards and forwards, blinking and speaking in tongues. Freaked me out so bad I chucked it out the window. I work night shifts at a children's hospital. Once a call bell went off around 3 AM from one of the back rooms, and it was a woman frantically saying, "Someone, please help me, the baby," with the baby crying in the background. I ran back there to help her, but the baby was alone, sleeping in the crib. I asked the nurse if anyone had been with the baby all night and she said no. He's been alone all night. It still creeps me out when I think about it. An old friend of my brother-in-law's who worked as a plumber was at our house talking to my husband about installing a sprinkler system for our front yard. He asked to see the main water connections in our crawl space. As he was walking past the kitchen door where I was cooking dinner, I looked up at him to smile and say hi. It was as if time stood still and he was in slow motion. 3 weeks later to the day, he was found beaten to death in a field outside of town by his estranged wife's new boyfriend. 2 years ago, I think, a friend and I sat on the balcony of my flat, drinking beer and talking. It was late in the evening, and you could clearly see many planes flying overhead. My friend had the flight radar app on his phone and we were checking out overhead flights, from where they were flying and to where. All of a sudden, while he had a flight from Paris to Cairo open, he just looked at me and in a very serious tone said, "This plane is going down." Then he started laughing. I laughed too and I brushed it off as drunken foolery. The next day I saw a report that a plane, headed from Paris to Cairo, crashed into the ocean. We never spoke of it. My boyfriend was stressed out from work and we hadn't really spent a lot of quality time together recently, so I organized a romantic getaway to a nearby lake. We stayed in a cozy, small inn above a pub that had a fireplace on at night and the owner's dog chilling next to it. It was close to Christmas and absolutely idyllic. In the afternoon, we went to a nearby luxury hotel and spa to use the sauna, and when we got out, We went into a bar that had bonfires installed in the middle of every table. There were only few guests in the hotel and most of them were locals just coming for food. The luxury hotel was a beautiful old mansion and I especially loved the gigantic Christmas tree in its lobby. I regretted that we didn't pay a little more and stayed in that hotel altogether. 2 weeks later, the luxury hotel burnt down. The fire killed a young couple on a romantic getaway. Just like us, the Christmas tree had caught fire. It still gives me chills to this day how this beautiful tree ended up killing 2 people just days later. When I was about 8 months pregnant with my second child, we had a small fire at our house. We filed an insurance claim and got money to replace carpets, curtains, paint, etc. We, myself, and husband, 3-year-old, went to the local big box hardware store to pick out paint colors and carpet. The paint aisle was busy so we went to carpet first. While we were looking at samples, we heard the loudest boom. The what sounded like the aisles literally falling over. It was deafening. We ran towards the back of the store and could see and smell smoke. The fire alarm was blaring and the employees were ushering us out the back. About the time we were getting close to the exit, a lady ran past us literally on fire. My husband chased after her, yelling for us to get out. We exited the building into a receiving area that was padlocked shut. The minutes it took someone with a key to unlock that gate so we could go around to the front and me find my husband seemed like forever. The lady was hospitalized for a long time and had many surgeries. She had been in the paint aisle. Someone had planted a pipe bomb there. USA, NC. Years ago when I was still living with my parents, at about midnight I was in the basement on the computer and I heard a loud crash. I went up to the main floor to see what happened and a larger, heavy book that was normally on the shelf sideways, sandwiched between other books, was on the floor about 5 feet away from the bookshelf. My parents had been asleep for hours. I have no siblings. Doors and windows were closed locked. I was wide awake as I was a night owl and didn't usually go to sleep until around 4 AM. I have no reasonable explanation for why this happened but it creeped me out. This one time I was on my way home from work. I was young, about 18 at the time. The company I worked for at the time, we just parked at our boss's house and used company vehicles to drive around. So I was all alone on this Friday driving into my boss's driveway so I can get to my car. As I parked the cube van I shut it off and heard the loudest gruesomest blood curdling scream I ever heard in my life. Sounded like a man. I didn't know what to do. I sat there pondering for a moment. There was no one parked at my boss's house. He's usually gone camping on Fridays. It was just me there. So I get out, check the shop door and his house, they're all locked. He lived in the country so no close neighbors. I peeked in the shop windows. Nothing. I went home feeling very uneasy all weekend. Monday morning came and everyone at work was there and fine. Never told anyone this. Not sure if I actually heard that or not now. I caught a guy video recording my preteen nieces changing clothes in a beach changing room. Don't know if I'm late to the party, but my aunt told me a creepy episode that happened to her some time ago. So, I'm from Italy, she's 2, and she lives in an isolated house in the Tuscany's hills, which are amazing during summer, but in winter, and especially in winter's nights, trust me, they're scary as hell. So, it was a cold and dark night, and my aunt was home alone with her 3-year-old child, aka my cousin, and that day my uncle had a night shift at work. It was about 11 PM when her doorbell rang. She got out on the balcony to see who was at the door, and she saw a young man. He was about 30. She told me that he didn't look that suspicious. The only thing that she noticed was that he was really tall. She said he was about 2 meters tall, approximately 6.5 feet. The man told her that he had an accident with his motorbike 1 or 2 kilometers away and he asked her if he could get in. Now, my aunt is an amazing woman, but she's really gullible and naive, and she didn't even think about, for example, how that dude got to her house considering she was in the middle of ducking nowhere, and she was gonna open to that guy. But, while telling me this story, she said, something just told me that I didn't have to let the guy in. So she got out on the balcony again and told the dude that she wouldn't have called policemen and ambulances for him. As soon as she said that, that guy ran away. She was terrified. and she locked herself in with the baby and called the police and my uncle. I still don't know what the guy would have done if she had let him in, and I'm glad I'll never know.